Right, okay. So tonight I'm going to cover off the part two around the more like compulsive binge eating side of things. And last time in part one, we spoke more about the nutritional aspect of this, rather than today, we're going to go more into the mind and the psychology part of all this. So hang on, so let me just move this out of the way because that's covering my screen. So in terms of what we covered last time, like I mentioned, we've done the nutritional element of it, and that's something that I would, someone that comes and presents themselves to me as possible binge eaters, this is kind of like the first element that I'd seek to explore. The next part of that is then going into the more personal and emotional element of this. So binge eating can be very much driven by emotion. It can be driven by a lot of life stress. It can even be stresses that you aren't always aware of as well. And that's where we need to do quite a bit of work to sometimes pull either something from the subconscious or really tapping into something that you might not. It's kind of like having that weight on your shoulders that you don't understand why that's there, but we can kind of like dig into that a little bit and kind of, chip away at reasons why this could be. And then also going through difficult times. Now, we do go through periods and chapters of life, some harder than others, that can really affect us a lot more deeply than what you think. And we actually need to go through periods of actually metabolizing some of these experiences that we go through, but many of us don't. So when we always feel like there's constantly something keeping us stuck, it can sometimes be that we've not fully processed, addressed, metabolized, understood some of the difficult periods of time that we've been through. And we just, if it's very much a sweep under the carpet, then this can start to amalgamate and amass into something a lot bigger. So it can be driven by a lot of personal and other nutritional factors as well. So oftentimes when this stress builds, like I mentioned last time, we can go into fight, flight, or freeze, or feed. And this is where the binge eating element comes in. We go into this feed response of that being like the safety blanket. And, we kind of do it without thinking. It's a very automatic response, just like we do, obviously, in times of when we do need to, when that stress of fight, flight, or freeze comes up, then for some people, feed is their version. That's where they go. That's their path. And our emotional and physiological metabolism uses food to de-stress from this. So there's that need and that security blanket that food can give us to calm us down, because it reduce, especially when we eat something that we really kind of, I was going to say enjoy, but because obviously when you go through a binge, you don't actually allow it to recognize to even actually enjoy it. But because generally it's more high fat, high sugar foods, we'll get a natural neurochemical kick out of this, and it'll kind of like boost that dopamine rush that we kind of get, like, oh yeah, that feels good. So feel stress, eat food, feel relaxed, and the cycle will go through: feel stress, eat food, feel relaxed. Because as soon as you then feel that relaxed state, then obviously the guilt and the shame comes in, and that again sends you back around in that stress loop. So it's the same, it's a repeating, recurring factor all the way through. And at some point after a binge, the body has to relax so it can digest the food that we've consumed. And it does take a long time for the body to actually digest high volumes of the food that we can consume sometimes in these binges. I just want to just double check that there's no one waiting in the waiting room, because I'm just conscious that I can't see on here. No, we're good. So eating enough food generally will actually drive us to this physiologic relaxation point. Some people actually don't eat enough and they never feel relaxed because they always feel like they're in famine. And again, that's like the opposite end of the spectrum then for those people. So binge eating can be a placeholder for something that's difficult in life to process. So if you've gone through some shit times, some difficult experiences, this can be why binge eating can come up, because it's basically a placeholder for that event happening. And it's having this undigested life event, something that's been really difficult to process emotionally, and it builds up in terms of our emotion, and this unprocessed experience needs as being like your outlet then. So binge eating is that kind of that temporary symbolic relief. And at the same time, binge eating is letting us know that there's something else calling for our attention to look at. Is there something else that's not quite right that we kind of need to address? Like I say, food isn't that isn't the reason for everything. It's there as like a symptom. So if we find ourselves turning to food for whatever reason, it's generally because, whether it's binge eating or not, if it's stress eating and overeating, comfort eating, because there's something else not being addressed, it's not the food's fault. So it can be a build-up of anger, resentment, disappointment, worry, fear, judgment, blame, feeling abused, or even feeling accused as well, loneliness, confusion, unexpressed sexuality, which I know that I've obviously done a talk on that previously in terms of the link between food and sexuality, and also past experience of sexual abuse, undelivered communication. So if you're kind of holding something back from someone, you kind of feel like you've always got to bite your tongue, this can be something as well. An unspoken truth. So if you feel like you are actually kind of keeping a bit of maybe perhaps a bit of a lie, you're kind of trying to keep something at bay, again, it's that build-up, it starts bubbling away at you. And any past hurt as well, breakups, loss, grieving, especially if you don't go through the full process of grieving and of what might have been right, if you're trying to rush through the processes, again, you've not kind of addressed all the steps. And it does look different to everybody, don't get me wrong, does grieving. But sometimes if there's certain parts that are missed, it can kind of sometimes catch up with you further down the line. Letting go of something or someone, not living up to our own standards, perfectionism, so they're kind of interlink. And I do see that a lot as well. Perfectionism, it's that black and white thinking of, if I can't do it 100%, what's the point? And that's completely the wrong view to have, because chipping away at things slowly but surely, 1% daily marginal gains will always get you to destination. 100% perfectionist thinking will never get you there. It might get you there for maybe like a very finite, short period of time, but because of the things you've had to do to get there are not sustainable. That's why, you kind of go into like these relapse phases. So in terms of looking at binge eating itself, what's the gift in this kind of compulsive behavior that you've got, this binge eating? What is it trying to say to you? And what's the most important message that it has for us at this point? And what's it asking us to pay attention to? And it's sometimes not always the most obvious thing. It might start you down a path, and especially like when you start journaling, you might think it's something that'll then actually snowball into something else. And this is something that I found with therapy of mind, of like, I thought all these like superficial things were actually to blame and, the cause of X, Y, and Z. But actually, when we get deeper, I'm like, actually, everything's because of this one thing. It's got like all these little branches that come off it. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, it's Dad's fault and Mum's fault. God bless them. Anyway, so in terms of how I want to coach around this, is that I want to start coaching, well, for a lot of you I do anyway, I coach you to be curious about these types of behavior. So whether it's binge eating or not, whether it's something to do with what you do of self-sabotage when you feel like you're in stress, this is going to be the same process. And you want to start forgiving yourself for what it is that you're doing. You want to stop judging yourself for the actions and the behaviors that you are taking, because it gets to a certain point where it does become automatic. We're going through that process over and over again. It's a learned behavior, and food ends up being the natural go-to, because the brain's learned that it's going to take you down that process, because it knows that need is going to be fulfilled temporarily through food at that point. But obviously, again, surface levels, like sticking a plaster over it, it's not digging deep in terms of what's causing that wound. So you need to start welcoming it, because it has got a purpose for being there, and we need to dig deeper. So it can be connected to what and how we eat, but also not. There's other things that kind of come into it for some people. It might have absolutely nothing to do with food exactly, but it might be everything to do with our inner world. Like I mentioned, food just ends up being the placeholder. And once you've actually explored the nutritional side, if this is then something that isn't solving that problem, then we will start to look deeper around everything else that's going on, the full 360 aside from food. So many clients do get good relief from focusing just on the food side, the nutritional element, the dimension of that. But then every now and again, there is this kind of like emotional link that does need to be reconnected, that needs to be explored. And I will say, emotional and binge eating is something that will probably always be there. It might just be, it's like turning the volume down on something. And this is what it was like for me. The volume was always ramped up, and I just couldn't ever hear myself think. It was constant brain fog, and just being felt like I was just being controlled all the time by something out of my own body. I was like, I just don't have control of this. I can't grab it. And then once I started doing the work, it was like, oh, actually, I've got the control now. I can just start to turn down the volume. And every now and again, I can hear that volume slightly coming up. And I'm like, I'll just visualize it. I'm just like, turn that knob back down. It's fine. What else is going on that's making that volume turn up right now for me? Is it because I'm stressed? Is it because I'm taking on too much work? Is it because everyone's putting expectations on me and I'm having to say no and put my boundaries in place, which for me still feels uncomfortable? So there's always like little things that you can start to recognize, these little patterns as to why that volume can be sometimes turned up. And we just want to keep turning it down, and eventually the voices and the noises, it does naturally just become more decreased over time. But again, it becomes, with practice, you've got to keep going over and over these things. Don't just happen just like that. And generally, this component around the emotive side is the big thing that needs to be addressed. And this is a part that does take a lot more time, and where I generally find that people have a lot less persistence and drive to want to get to the bottom of it, because it gets challenging. And then challenging means for a lot of people that it's too hard, can't do it. But if you ever think that you're being challenged, like, oh, actually, this is exciting because this means it's pushing my realms of growth. And that means you should keep pushing more, keep going further, harder. Just maybe to give it some time to reflect, kind of come back to it another point if it really is. I mean, I know that Kate, there's something I mentioned to you about obviously that self-authoring. Like self-authoring is really, really hard to do. And it takes time to go through that process, where you really have to dig deep into some questions that, for me, I literally was saying to myself, like, F this shit, I cannot do this. This is really making me angry. With the nutritionist that I was working with at the time, I was getting really irate about it. And I'm like, look, just need to leave it 24, 48 hours before I come back to this. And then by doing that, it allows those emotions at the time to kind of settle, think more logically around it, and then come back to that question, like, actually, right now, I can see a different answer. I can see a different path around this now. So we want to see it as a doorway. Every eating challenge is here to teach us something. And binge eating is often here to ask us to pay attention to a place in life that we are uncomfortable to actually be in. But we need to be in that place. And the power of a binge itself is equal to the power that we can actually have available then for our own growth. So even though that binge feels so hard to overcome and to resist, think of then actually, that amazing amount of power that has over you, that you actually can then start to take back control over and use in positive means, and totally reframe that. And once we turn our attention to this is actually when we start to find like a more true calling and going down this path of real self-discovery. So with a binge itself, it's generally a short-term imbalance related to a life transition, some element of life unfolding, a temporary dietary imbalance, which obviously that's the easier side to start addressing, and then some potential particularly intense emotional times as well. These all pass. And nothing really needs to be done, but we need to notice and be aware of actually what is going on around us at these points, because it can be a calling for us to actually come forth into pastures that we've not been to before, revealing like an unexpressed passion, perhaps. We've got even when you think of food itself, food can be a passion for people, but we get told by society that we shouldn't feel that way towards food, because obviously that's like gluttony. It's like you've got no self-control of yourself. You really feel passionate about food. So we get told that basically, if you're in love with food, you really enjoy your food, and then you kind of like generalize it to the population, then yeah, a lot of them do tend to be more overweight in terms of the ladies that I've seen and worked with. But because they always feel like they shouldn't feel like that, it makes that process go on. Whereas if you like, actually, I'm giving you permission to actually enjoy that food, enjoy the bloody food that you're eating. And it starts to take like a weight off your shoulders of like, I'm allowed to enjoy this. I'm allowed to gain pleasure from this food. Food is there for pleasure. We're there as a species, as human beings on this planet, to seek connection through food and social occasions. It's how we are. We're social beings. But it can also show us hunger for something else that we might have that's outstanding in life as well. So something where we can grow into that we might not have explored before. So I want to just kind of share a case study of someone previously. Change the names on this so it kind of just anonymizes it a bit more. But so Sophie, she was 39 years old, female. She was a home visiting nurse, two teenage girls, married, middle class, intelligent, very good at conversation, really devoted to what she was doing with her whole family. And that extends to the whole family as well. It's not just immediate. Enjoys doing what she does as a job. And her mother, who's getting quite elderly now, was living with her. She's been binge eating for around 20 years, most nights, sometimes then also into the late afternoon. And she's managed this for many years, and it hasn't really impacted her weight until recently. So she's recently found that she had 15-pound weight gain, and the binge eating was getting worse and more intense and more frequent in the afternoons, and she felt very much trapped, doesn't know what to do, where to turn to, and actually really, really embarrassed because she feels that she's got no control over this, and she's kind of like disgraced with herself about it. And she's actually kept the binge eating a secret from everybody, so it's intensified quite a lot over the last year. She feels a massive amount of shame, but she tries to manage it the best that she can. It's never really affected her weight, so she's kind of just gone with it and learned to live with it until recently. But she's very intent on now actually losing this weight that she's gained, and she's a fast eater. Poignant point. Hopefully that's kind of rings true for some of you online ladies of why I ask about fast eating. So, oh, hang on, this is massively skipped ahead. Hold the phone. Maybe I've pressed somewhere that I shouldn't. Epic fail that, isn't it? Christ. Come on, come on, come on. My God, I didn't realize how many slides I'd done. Apologies. It won't take that long to get through these. Right. Strategically click. There we go. So her main binge foods, like so many, chocolates, sweet, ice cream, cake. She hides everything. So where she actually lives, she has a basement, a cellar, and it goes straight out onto where her bins are. So she can literally just go straight out and hide everything. It's really difficult and stressful in her house because there's so many people around all the time. And she's shocked at the power of this like compulsive behavior that she's got around binge eating. And she believes that trigger foods have an intense power over her. So she basically fears keeping them in the house, but she actually has a secret stash. And she now realizes it's time to go deeper because no matter what diet she does, it's not solving the problem. So to kind of give an overview of what she eats: morning, non-fat yogurt, coffee. Snack, coffee, low-fat creamer. Lunch, salad, bit of protein. Afternoon, this is generally where during certain points of the week she'll binge around 3:30. And then she'll have generally a decent, an all right evening meal. She'll get a protein in there, some kind of starch and veggies. And those 6 days in a week, she binges before she then goes to bed as well. So in terms of how we'd then look at this, starting from the nutrition strategy from what we mentioned in part 1, we'd look to balance out her breakfast and lunch to get more protein into those two, and make sure that lunch is slightly more robust than lettuce leaves and chicken. Obviously, I know at some points that we are going to have to go that deep with some people, depending on where they are in, like, obviously, certain phases of everybody's goals different. Angela, just thinking of you, no offense, but we might have to dig that deep at some point, but it won't be for a long time. Also having a bit of a healthier mid-morning snack, and also something to snack on in between. So at the time when she usually binges, which is around 3:30. We also then look to work on being more relaxed, slowing down and being very much aware of what she eats. And also because of the, you'll notice that there's like no fat yogurt, there's no fat creamer. For me, that instantly rings that she is scared of fats. So I ask her if she's happy to take supplements. She is. And we then put in an essential fatty acid supplement. So that's what that is, essential fatty acids. So like your omega-3s, krill oil, they're the main ones usually. Flaxseed oil as well, that'd work. So in 2 weeks, just by doing those little strategies around food alone, afternoon binging stops. She's shocked. She hasn't gained any more weight either, because obviously she feels like she's eating more food too. So she was kind of worried, like, oh my God, you're making me eat more. But actually, when you look at the amount that she was binging on versus obviously having more wholesome, nourishing foods, calories in this amount of food, very dense amount of calories. Calories ended up being less in the more voluminous food that's more nourishing. Her evening binging is still going on. She is less hungry at dinner and in the afternoon, and she does have more energy. So again, something really key to note, more energy, which is something that so many people negate the importance of. But it can often be, a huge detriment of always feeling like you're really lethargic. Her hair's feeling good, and I know that obviously that's always a good one when we notice that hair and nails and skin are looking better. And oops, typo, she's really happy that she's obviously starting to do this work. So for me, I'm not surprised that afternoon binging is gone. It makes sense in terms of what we've now put in place. We've also explored the possible nutrition dimensions in terms of binge eating and how that could impact her. There is an emotional component going on at this in terms of why she's binge eating at night. And she says that these binge times are very personal for her. She has a bit of a ritual where she'll go down into the cellar. She's got like a sewing room that she likes to do as a hobby. So it's a private room, and she binges in there because she can then easily toss out this rubbish outside and no one needs to know about it. So down in time, obviously this takes time to get to this point, but we start to dig a little deeper. And so the thing that she kind of came out and realized was that her sex life with her husband was really unsatisfying. She also noticed that she actually had attraction to other men, and she couldn't understand what was going on. She felt really disconnected from her desires. So we actually got her to write a sexual autobiography. And this autobiography, I know that I've mentioned this before in the other talk, this is around basically going back as far as you can remember, around the first time you kissed a boy, the first time that you thought certain feelings and express yourself sexually, first boyfriends that you had, first actual time that you had sex, and just kind of write kind of a diary as to what goes on. As far back as you can remember. Obviously, it's not always going to be chronological because there'll be stuff that pops up in between, but she went through this process. And what happened then, she actually cancelled the next 2 appointments with me in terms of jumping on to one-to-one chats with me. So sent her an inquiry email just to see if there's anything that's happening, anything that I should know about. So she did actually then come back on, managed to get back onto another call. And she then actually shares with me her story around being sexually abused. This was by her older brother, and he raped her 3 times. And she then feels gutted that she thought that she'd forgotten about this and she wanted to forget. And she now feels, because obviously going through this autobiography task, this has all brought it up for her. She's reliving it and she really just wanted to forget it. She's kept it a secret for 25 years. Only one of her closest best friends knows about it. And she then married the first guy that made her feel safe. Her family completely turned a blind eye. So she kind of thought and had an inkling that her parents kind of knew about this. So what we kind of discussed then was that binge eating became a placeholder for the anger, the grief, the hurt that she's been feeling. And that it's possibly time that she finally faces this like she hasn't before, and actually starts to face it more like an adult. Because it's very much like a childlike state we go into as well when we start to hide around, when things like this happen to us, and it's totally understandable. So her binge eating was a doorway. Her nighttime binges had actually nothing to do with food. She created basically a diet that supported binge eating during the day. So she was eating very minimal that would then allow for her to binge. And her compulsion was balancing out her emotional control. So once she then realized this, she's like, brilliant, it's time that we can start digging a little bit deeper. So strategies that we started to work on with her, starting to speak the truth. She had to face the fact that she probably needed to speak to her brother at some point. She also possibly needed to tell her mother, and also she had a really good relationship with her older brother. And also her husband never knew about this. So she also thought that she might need to talk to her husband actually about their marriage itself. And obviously this is going over a period of months now, so this isn't something that someone does all at once. We then worked to do a desire inventory. So she did a lot of work around what her true desires are and starting to explore that and integrating steps of this as well. we looked that she needed to start creating some equality with men because she'd obviously had such a traumatic experience around what had happened to her. Her husband was obviously very much in a different kind of kettle of fish, but all of the men, she was very much fearful. She needed to let her voice be heard and feel important and directly deal with the conflict that's happened and start to claim back her sexuality, but on her terms. Because obviously this had happened to her as like, 12, 13-year-old. And that completely just ruins your teenage years of then what you perceive sex and sexuality to then be, and become obviously very, very guarded in that. So after 9 months of working together, we kind of felt that it was time for us to part ways at that point. She'd gone through 2 professionally mediated sessions with her brother. Obviously, a lot of tears, honesty, and healing from this. And it just so happened that her brother had been living with intense guilt and shame as well. So he'd been hiding this, knowing that this was something that was chewing away at him, but didn't obviously know what to do about it. Her binges decreased to once per week. And then 6 months later after that, when I checked in again, it was now happening like twice a month, if that. So she then continues her work and continues to keep being honest with everyone around her, especially like with her husband, etc. as well. So healing our relationships with food doesn't mean that we are always going to love our bodies. We're going to have times where we're really going to struggle. And there's always going to be times when you're not going to ever overeat again, when you're never going to binge eat again or emotionally, like Sophie's example there. It's still carried on, but the times and the gaps between it happening became, instead of like every single day per week, practically, to being like once a week, twice a week tops, or then like going then eventually like 2-month spurts. So we need to remember that we are never going to be perfect eaters, and we are never going to have perfect control of our appetite. And actually believing that we can control our appetite is, again, a false and a toxic belief that we have to let go of. We have to listen to appetite. So healing our relationship with food means we can now navigate our emotions and regulate them a lot better with a lot more grace. It's okay to be imperfect, and we have to be okay with that as well. We make mistakes, but we can also still love ourselves in that process. And overall, we have to have a more nourishing experience with food and our body together, and also embrace those moments of challenge. And we need to go through them and navigate through to learn new skills, and we also gain more dignity through that. A binge has power, and we have to start to learn to, working together, coach and client, that we're here to redirect and reharness the power of that binge, what it has over you at that point. At the same power that's overcoming us can be transformed into something that really moves and supports us into a very different path. And binge eating's always been a brilliant reason for its existence, and it's generally deep-rooted in psychology, science, or potentially for a lot of people, both. And I have to listen to those messages. So when you're doing your check-ins, when you're having those conversations, like, is there certain terminology, not that I'm pointing fingers, around calories and such, where I can start to see these patterns coming through, but it brings them some self-awareness into the present, and like, kind of like penny drop moment, light bulb moment. So another client, Linda, single, 36, female, investment advisor, works for a very big financial firm. She's quite outgoing, well-spoken, very career-focused, and she's originally from a small town, but now lives in the big city. She's a dedicated exerciser and loves to portion control all her food, counting everything to the absolute gram, but she still binges most nights. She doesn't gain weight, but she's afraid that it's kind of getting to the point where she kind of feels it's going to be coming. It's getting more intense, is the binge, over the last several months. And she uses exercise as a compensatory measure. So she'll exercise harder when she's binged harder to be that compensatory balance, to try and burn off those calories that she's obviously eating for another reason, that placeholder effect. And she realizes she can't keep up with this pace. Basically, it's kind of controlling her life now. She needs to get control over it. In terms of her background, she had very little affection from her parents growing up, and Mum was very concerned about her own weight during Linda's upbringing, and this can probably ring true for a few of us because this is very much something that I was privy to when I was younger. There's very much a very strong educational, intellectual values within the family. You know, they're very bright. You know, that's what she came to. She's like, I know all the things, but why can't I just control this? Like, I'm clever, I get it, but what else is going on? She began dieting very early in high school, and her actual binge eating, you know, in terms of like more of a DSM-5 kind of terminology, has been going on for the last 5 years. In terms of what she eats, so cereal, fruit, skim milk in the morning, snacks, none, just water, lunch, maybe a chicken sandwich or a chicken salad and Diet Coke, bit of fruit. She eats out generally at night. She'll portion control when she's out, and she doesn't overdo it when it comes to alcohol. Then it gets to 11 p.m. and there we go, binge time. Cereal, nuts, non-fat cookies, biscuits, ice cream, whatever that is, soft serve ice cream. And again, she is a fast eater. So this is where I don't think I've gone fully through feminine and masculine archetypes. It was actually one of the talks that I did for the emotional eating seminar that ran that full week. Linda is all about the numbers, and this is a very masculine archetype. So because she's obviously investment driven financially as well, she's all about calories, fat grams. She weighs herself a lot. She burns to exercise and burn off those calories that she's done, in terms of obviously looking on either a Fitbit or the actual screen itself where it says what calories you've burned. She won't stop until she's burned X amount of calories that she thinks she needs to. She's actually quite slender. She's very attractive and has the weight and body that she wants, but she has no joy in eating. And she doesn't really take much joy or pride in her body either. She doesn't smile very much. And she does complain that the men in her life are very shallow. Yet when we actually spoke a little bit more, her life as well actually seemed quite shallow. So obviously you've got to think of your life as a mirror as well. So whatever you're portraying, you know, the outward energy, you generally attract back. So she's living so far from her feminine. So like I said, very numbers driven. She has what so many women seem to want, but there's something really disembodied and absent about her. You know, so I really want her to try and embrace the feminine more, and in whatever ways possible, to help her relax, let go of numbers driving her life, and happy to use like the concerns that she has around weight gain to motivate to look at things from a different perspective. She is so numbers orientated. So I will use generally more of a scientific approach to kind of explain things, because that's what's going to resonate better for her. And my goal is her highest goal, not her smaller one. So her binge eating is then a doorway into something deeper and more meaningful. So her binge eating is clearly triggered by her diet. So she got very minimal food up until lunchtime. It's just, sorry, but it's like, it's practically pretty crap, yeah. Low fat, low protein. She eats super fast. She's got a fear of food. She's got a fear of her appetite. And when she's eating, she's not mindful when she's doing it. She's not present. So she doesn't get enough overall nutrition through her day. And this is why I always stress why it's so important to make sure that protein, especially, we have it staggered all through the day. So ideally, yes, across 3 meals or 4 or even 5 if we can stretch it, depending obviously what someone's individual hunger and appetite looks like. So because she's not eating enough during the day, it naturally leads her to binge at night, because she's simply, her body's just crying out. It's like, just feed me. So she gets no nourishment or pleasure from food during the day or evening, which then seeks her to get this intense need for pleasurable foods when she lets her guard down late at night. And her choices are then driven by a fear of food. She's fearful of getting any more body fat and gaining weight. She's actually fearful of actually having pleasure and letting go. You know, very much highly strung. So there's a lot of toxic and outdated nutritional beliefs that she's holding here about what's going on. So in terms of initial strategies that we'd look to use here, So nutritional balance across the day, including more snacks, and we get some nutrient dense foods in there. Finding also some pleasure foods that she can have. And again, this is something that we explore, like, pleasure inventory. Tell me everything that gives you pleasure, including foods. We learn to slow down and we look at nourishing. We take away the scales. She weighs twice a day. This was actually a big one. It's a hard one to say for her to actually agree to this. And she couldn't guarantee that she wouldn't weigh herself, but she said she would try. I'm going to probably do a reel on the word try. That word try really annoys me. So I then start to go through and explain, when you are in a stress response, the impact that it actually has on your appetite. You need to relax around food in order to kind of allow your body to do what it needs to do and nourish itself from the inside out. So after 4 weeks, so 2 sessions in at this point, having bi-weekly calls, she said that she had more energy. She feels better on this diet. And I'm always like, when someone says it's a diet, I'm like, it's not a diet. It's a way of eating that's more nourishing to live. She didn't gain any weight. She was super bowled over by that because I'm telling her to eat more. And again, really, really scared about doing that. She said that her mood's better, which for someone that's quite miserable is very good. And not nearly as hungry during the day, which is grand. She said she's still binge eating at night, but it seems a little less tense, which is good, intense, because evenings are the hardest time for her. So we then start to look over the next 6 weeks then to focus more on her feminine self. So we actually tell her, because I asked her, the environment that she lived in. I'm like, explain to me where you live. What does it look like? And obviously, because I can see when I'm on Zoom anyway, give me a little bit of a wander around your house, like some of you do, like when you're on this and you'll wander around. I'm like, I'm taking note. And it's very plain white everywhere, very minimalistic. It's actually very, very masculine, a bit of a lad's pad, if you like. So I'm like, how about you invest a little bit of money to actually start decorating and start thinking room by room of what you'd like to do. And she does. She starts to also, I ask her to connect with her healthier girlfriends. So if you ever notice yourself being surrounded by friends that are always talking negatively about food and diet and body, should you really be spending that much time with them? And this is where I started to question that, right, who are you spending the most time with? Are they mood hoovers or are they energizers? And who could you start to spend more time with? She also said, because she's a country girl at heart, she loves being in nature where her parents live. And how many times per month, per quarter, can you get back over there and see them? So that's something that she started to plan in. I think she started off once a month to begin with, to actually start going back and getting back into nature. And she also wants to start looking at other ways to meet men, minus obviously being in bars, because we know they're types. And we start to get rid of exercise, obviously in a traditional sense. And I ask her, what movements do you actually enjoy doing? What do you, if you could have a hobby or take something up that you used to do when you were younger that you used to really enjoy, what would that be? Because really, exercise was a form of punishment in order to keep control of her binge eating. And it's so common that, because I used to do that, that's my massive thing. I'd punish myself for hours on a treadmill to try and burn all the calories off that I'd eaten. So we then looked at her mum. And we did have a couple of conversations about her mum. And even though she loves her, she hates her mum's weight. So her mum is overweight. And I totally get this because my mum's always been overweight as well. And she's always said that her mum's always dieting, but she needs to lose at least 100 pounds. So we talked about, could she start to actually accept her mum for who she is? And ask, can she forgive her mum for being the weight that she is? We talked about finding a way for Linda to be Linda, as opposed for her to not try and look and be like her mum. Who is Linda? What's she about? What are her values? Rather than this fear of, I just don't want to end up like my mum, don't want to end up like my mum. And I've been there. That's the stuff I used to say to myself all the time. And she was spending a ton of energy focusing on what she didn't want to be rather than what she did want to be. So anyone that's been through the initial goal setting training, it's very much, again, going through the same process of, saying what you want more of rather than, saying everything that you want less of, and drawing then your brain's attention to that when you want to be looking at, right, what do I want to become? Who do I want to be? And start acting and taking action to become that person. So for women, our relationship with food and body can often track our relationship with our mother. I'm doing a lot of work in therapy on this at the minute, so it's interesting. This, I like going through these. So after 5 months, she's expressed that the binge eating's pretty much gone. It happens once in a while when she's really stressed. So again, she's noticing them triggers. She can see that build up. She has like a nice snack at night now, so something that gives her pleasure, and she acknowledges she's allowed to have that pleasure. She's very much happier. She's more present to people. She's way more herself, and she actually looks more radiant. So now when you can just see that someone's kind of like just beaming a little bit more, you can just kind of get that energy and that vibe from her. So in terms of final thoughts around Linda's case, we worked on nutritional and emotional level. We needed for her to step into being more of a mature princess. And I know that I've mentioned this before about being like a princess in training, a princess, mature princess, queen in training into a queen. So we go through these life stages up until this queen point. So Sandra, you are my queens. You are, and I do believe that you stepped into your queendom, actually, very much so. And Linda then benefited from having conscious conversations with me that truly mattered, because she was very quite superficial, skirted over quite a lot of things, but we started to go deeper. And this is a great gift that I'd like to try and get to with all of you, where we do go, especially around when it comes to food and negative emotions and behaviors, that we do get deeper on certain things. She noticed that she needed to change her view, her map of the world around food and body. And she truly did make an effort with this. People that make the effort, take the action, they're the ones that are going to get the results. There was other little successes along the way. She started to really trust our direction of work. We did the necessary nutritional tweaks, and we really focused on her becoming more feminine. So it's really, really important that if you start to see that you're getting like really super numbers driven, or if it's everything's becoming very competitive, very black and white thinking, I might actually, if I try and get hold of the recording that I did for that presentation for that week, I'll share that in the group as well, so you've got that to recap on at some point, the masculine and feminine archetypes that we fall into, because I think there will be some real key takeaways of what you might notice. And we're all allowed to be a mix. It's like yin and yang, basically, but we'll have different percentages. So say like I might be, I don't know, I think I've probably got quite a strong masculine about me as well at points, because I've just used to being in that very sales dominant area where I've had to become more out there, a bit more abrupt. And there is this kind of like toss up of, to what point can a woman be successful and powerful, but without being seen as being arrogant, or people having a disliking for her because they see that as like some kind of that masculine vibe to get off someone. It's kind of like feel threatened by it. So it's very interesting conversation. So what we need to look at next is the transitions that we will go through in life, and we need to look at coming into a new territory. Many of the challenges that you all face with food, health, and body, they're born out of difficulty of certain life transitions. Sometimes upheaval. I've seen it when people have moved from the countryside into the city, and it really just hasn't worked for them. When they've gone through certain breakthroughs, times of change, whether it's like career-wise, or if something's happened in terms of like family upset, relationships, at times of uncertainty. Again, we're coming into potentially another recession. Again, massive uncertainty for a lot of people, and people deal with it very differently. But they're all part of life, and we have to start developing skills to navigate these, rather than let our behaviors go towards food being like a temporary adjunct. And the rules have changed during transition periods. And if you can start thinking of any that you might have been through where certain things have come up for you, is there has to be a tolerance for uncertainty. Life is goddamn uncertain. You cannot have certainty over life at all. And those people that do believe that, again, perfectionistic mindset, it all kind of links in together. You need to look for guidance, help, and mentorship when you feel you are going through a difficult period in life. You have to learn to become open and start to trust, especially if you are looking at, you know, some kind of mentor or coach, trust that process. You want to look at getting deeper into spirituality, look to start being curious and questioning things that are going on around you, and accept the fact that there is going to be some resurrection of the past. It's going to come up. There is going to be emergence of the shadow, and it is going to feel uncomfortable, but we have to walk and bring that shadow into the light. We need for nourishment, and we need to welcome things that are new. So do question yourself, you know, are you in a transition? Have you recently come out of a transition? What has that transition looked like for you? How could I possibly help you relax into this transition period? What, you know, it's like when people come on board with me and I try and keep things, it differs person to person, but I'll always try and keep things really super simple. Like I've mentioned, building that house. You know, if you try to build a house too quickly on foundations that haven't set, the house is going to fall. We need to help you learn to create these small little building blocks, to slowly put them in place, stop being so goddamn impatient, and start to do the work. So how can I mentor you and befriend you better in this time as well? But also look at where life's calling you. What is life teaching you right now? There's always a lesson to be had. So some potential homework, some of you might have already done some of these, and some of you will have some of these to come, depending obviously, you know, it's very much situational as where I drop these in. A control inventory. Where are you trying to have shit tons of control over your life that isn't realistic? What could you influence? What's out of your control? Start to map that out. Pleasure inventory. Basically everything gives you pleasure in life. Desire. What are your true desires? Do you actually know what your true desires are in life? So many people aren't, or they dull them because they think they're not actually worthy of being explored. That's never going to happen. So what's the point? That's, you know, it's really, you know, the fixed mindset state to kind of keep yourself in, you know. And can you describe if you were to be that wild man or that wild woman, what would that look like? Where is life asking you to open up, surrender, and relax? You know, is there something that you are really keeping quite uptight about, that you're really trying to keep control over, that really just needs to be unleashed? And when and with whom do you feel that you can be your true authentic self? Are there certain people that you have in your life that you feel you can't be your authentic self with? And then when we see that list of people, we look to put boundaries in place. We start to not necessarily remove those people, but we might want to distance ourselves from some people. We might also do a sexual autobiography. We also might do a trauma or hard times autobiography. So writing through some real tough times and the transition periods that you've been through in life. So ending slide. Life itself is the proper binge. So we want to do all the good shit in life. Food shouldn't be that controlling thing that's holding you back. If it is holding you back on something, if it is feeling like it's got a huge grasp on you, then let's go and start walking through that door. Let's start exploring, because there's a bigger world out there. If any of this obviously has resonated, as always, drop me a question in the group chat in the app. If you do want to share something with the group, honestly, you know, go for it. I know that you'll always be supported in the group if anyone does want to share anything around this, any kind of realizations. And again, you know, person by person of where areas of this need to be worked on further, we will go through this in a deeper level on a one-to-one basis and through check-ins and such. But yeah, what time are we on? How have I done? Oh yeah, I was a bit longer today. So all right. I always try and keep them to 30 minutes, but it never ends up happening. Anyway, right, I'm going to finish the rest of my tea because I've still not finished it. But yeah, thank you so much for those that have arrived and been here tonight. Again, this will be up and ready to see in the next 24, 48 hours if anyone that's missed it. And yeah, there to recap if you do want to recap on it. But have a lovely evening, and thank you very much for joining me tonight. See you later, everybody.
Bye.